Okay, with the floor perfectly dry now, we're ready to apply the Craft Oil 2K. One of the many benefits of this oil product is the ease of application, but also the flexibility we have with regard to the method of application. Now this is a useful property because although with the floor we have here today, there's no gaps whatsoever, the surface is very uniform, there's not a problem with applying the oil using just a red pad with the centre removed. Pour the oil into the centre of the pad and then apply it in this method. If though on the other hand we've got floors with lots of gaps, so parquet floors or floorboards, we want to avoid the oil going down these gaps. So one way that we can do this is to put a cloth underneath the red pad and then pour the oil in. This is going to apply the oil a lot less generously, so we're not going to have lots of liquid ingressing in these areas where it's able to. Another method that we could use is a trowel application, where we just pour a small pool of product on the floor and then distribute it evenly with a trowel. We could even apply it with a cloth, with a brush. It's really not critical. The key aspects of the application of the Craft Oil 2K is to make sure that we get it onto the whole surface, leave it for a moment, but we don't want it to dry on the surface, and then we buff the excess off while it's still wet. So that's the process that we're going to use today. And like I say, we're going to apply it simply with a red pad on the flexi-sand. And first I just need to mix up the Craft Oil 2K. Obviously a two-component product. We have this tin of hardness separate in the case of the 400ml size, but this is also available as a 1 1/4 litre size pack. Typical coverage is about 30 square meters per litre of product, so a little of this goes a very long way. So with the hardener added, it's important that we give it a good stir to mix the hardener in uniformly, but also bear in mind that some of the Craft Oil colours do have a lot of pigment which can settle out somewhat. So it's really important that we make a bit of an effort to make sure that any pigment that's at the bottom is evenly distributed too. With the hardener added, we've got at least 4 hours to apply the mixed product. So it's a comfortable length of time to be able to use the amount that we've mixed. And we're ready to go. If we find that we're running out of oil, it's a very simple matter. Just applying a little bit more to the pad and we can continue. Of course, ordinarily, I wouldn't have the luxury of having a floor which doesn't have any borders, so we would have those areas to do. This can be done very simply, just with a rag, with a cloth, with a brush. It's really not too critical. So we can do the edges separately. It makes no difference. We're not going to get any overlap lines. We're not going to get any varying intensity of the colour. So it's a really safe system to use. So like I said, we would leave this a few moments just for the oil to penetrate, and then we can begin buffing off all the excess. Now this is a really important aspect because we need the stain in the timber, not sitting on the surface as a coating. And once we've done that, we can leave it to dry. So we can begin that process now. So I'm just going to put this clean oilcloth onto the floor, tuck the edges over. This will be held in place by the weight of the machine. It's important to get the pad on centrally, otherwise the machine is less easy to control. Following this process, we then need to leave the floor to dry for a minimum of 12 hours. And this would be under normal room conditions, so 20 degrees, 50% humidity. If it's particularly cold on site, it's going to retard the drying time, which we need to be very mindful of because, at low temperatures, it will take longer to dry, and we must ensure it's dry before we overcoat it with lacquer if that's our intention. Okay, our surface is all nicely dry now. So we've got the nice dark effect that's come from the brushing and the water popping, and we're going to now apply a second coat of a different colour. So we call this process accent tinting, and of course it allows for a lot of creative freedom. So we have currently 17 colours of the Craft Oil 2K. But obviously if we're mixing and matching them like this, there's a massive range available. But what we'll notice from this is the very specific look that this process provides. So I'm just going to quickly mix this up and apply this in exactly the same way as before. And you can see that we've now produced a very different effect with the floor. We've got that slight texture from the fibre pads that have given us that slight brushing to the wood, which has allowed us to really get the ash coloured Craft Oil 2K to emphasise the grain pattern with that nice rich underlying brown colour. So we now have to leave this for 12 hours minimum before we then overcoat it with the Traffic HD. Okay, our second coat of Craft Oil 2K, the Craft Oil 2K Ash, is now completely dry. It's had at least 12 hours to dry. It's always a good idea though, before attempting the next stage, which is a lacquer application. This is done in order to render the surface more durable and really to protect the treatment as well. As you can imagine, when you go for these more involved looks with the floor, it's going to be less easy to perform any repairs if we're just dealing with the oiled surface. So it's far better in many environments, like I say, in kitchen environments or higher traffic environments, that we overcoat it with either Traffic HD or Traffic Natural. It's important that it's one of our two-component products because that works tremendously well with the two-component oil. It's a really compatible system. So the first thing that I'd want to check is that that coat is dry. So I've just got a clean piece of paper. We just rub that on the surface, and what we're looking for is it to be completely clean like this. So we know that it's dry. We've removed all of the excess material, and like I say, it's just simply left now to overcoat with the Traffic HD. Obviously, got 5 litres of the Traffic here, enough to do a single coat on 50 square metres, so we don't need anything like that quantity. So instead I'm just going to quickly mix up a smaller volume just to do this, this panel. Really important information here, before we decant smaller volumes from the main Traffic bottle, we must shake it vigorously. Sometimes matting agents can settle out in the container, and this means if we don't shake the product, the first quantity that I decant off is going to have no matting agent, so it's going to be super shiny. And then when I pour out the second batch, the bottom part of the bottle, in other words, is going to be very, very matte indeed. So, like I say, really important that we shake the main Traffic bottle before decanting from it. So I'm going to mix up about 1 litre. With this mixing bottle, we've got clear graduations on the side, which enables us to gauge the quantity of product and then add the correct amount of hardener. And I'll just top this up to the second mark on the container, and we're there. I imagine many people have used the Traffic product before, but just for those that haven't, it's really important that we shake the hardener into the Traffic HD. We can't just stir it in a paint tray with a stick or something. It has to be shaken. It's the only effective way of mixing the two components. In terms of application today, we're going to be using the medium pile roller. That's the Bona polyester roller. And this makes the process very simple. So I can start the application now. I'm going to pour the product directly onto the floor, and the reason I'm able to do this is that I don't have any gaps in the flooring. It's completely sealed, if you like, so we're safe pouring the product directly on. If it was a different situation, I might pour the product into one of the Bona boxes with a plastic bag and use that as a paint tray. So there's a bit more control like that. But in this instance, I'm safe to pour it on. Of course, we're lucky in this sense, we don't have any edges to do, which we would normally do with the brush. So I can just go straight on with the roller. First part of the application that's important is to get the roller fully loaded with product. This will help us get the correct coverage rate of 8 to 10 square meters per litre. So you can see that all of that product that I've poured out is pretty much held in the roller. So I'll pour a small amount more. And this is the standard roller application that we would advocate, whereby we're going across the floor in 2 directions. And there's a good reason for this, because although in here we've got very good light, when you're working in poor light conditions, it can be quite easy to miss a small area. But if we're going over in 2 directions, that's not possible. So I've just roughly distributed the product out, and now I'm going to even it out. I'm not putting any downward weight on the roller, just letting it work under its own steam. What's quite interesting is at the moment, because the product's wet, it's quite shiny. And this is really showing off that subtle texture that we introduced with the fibre pad. The version of Traffic HD I'm using is in fact the extra matte. So when it's dry, it's going to be very flat, and it's not going to differ much from the simple oil treatment that we've had. But of course with the Traffic, we'll have a really resistant wear coat on top of the treatment, which will protect it. And then it's just a question of maintaining that wear layer with the correct cleaning, and we can overcoat at intervals in the future before the wear has progressed too far. Of course, in doing this, we should be able to avoid ever having to sand the floor heavily again. And the final last bit. So a typical treatment schedule would be the craft oil, and as we've seen, we can use it as a single application, or we can do the accent tinting like we've done here with a second application, and then we would overcoat that with 2 coats of Traffic HD or Traffic Natural. Of course, in some environments, particularly more challenging ones, we can either increase the number of coats for the initial application, or, as I mentioned, at later intervals, we can just give the surface a clean, a light sand, and apply additional coats before it's too worn. So now we'll leave this to dry, take about 2.5 hours, and then we'll apply a second coat.